The preacher's wife struck Adelaide Brennan across the face with such force that blood pooled in her mouth, metallic and thick, while 24 God-fearing citizens watched from their Sunday pews in Wilson, Kansas, without uttering a single word of protest. It was September 1882, and Adelaide had made the fatal mistake of reaching for the collection plate with her left hand, the hand her mother had tried for 18 years to bind behind her back, the hand that marked her as something unholy in a world that saw the devil in every shadow. The preacher himself pointed a trembling finger at her and declared before the entire congregation that she bore the mark of Satan, that her sinister hand proved she consorted with darkness, and that Wilson would suffer drought and pestilence if they allowed such wickedness to remain among them. Adelaide's father, a broken man since her mother's death 2 winters past, stood slowly from the back pew and spoke words that would echo in her mind for years to come. He told her to pack her things and be gone by sunset, that he had tried to correct her affliction through prayer and discipline and beatings, but that she remained stubbornly cursed. He said he loved her, but loved God more, and that he could not watch his only child drag his soul to hell alongside hers. The other townspeople nodded their approval, their faces hard as the Kansas stone beneath the church floor. Adelaide walked out of that building with nothing but the dress on her back and the shame they had heaped upon her shoulders, though she held her head high because she refused to let them see her break. She left Wilson heading west with $7 she had hidden in her boot and no clear destination in mind. The prairie stretched endlessly before her, golden grass rippling under a merciless sun that seemed determined to bake the very life from her bones. Adelaide had never been more than 5 miles from Wilson in her entire life, had never slept anywhere but her narrow bed in her father's house, had never imagined a world beyond the strict confines of that judgmental little town. Now the world was too big, too open, too full of dangers she could not name. She walked for hours until her feet bled through her worn boots, until thirst made her tongue stick to the roof of her mouth, until she began to wonder if perhaps everyone had been right and she truly was cursed. By nightfall, she had reached a creek bed that ran shallow and clear, and she collapsed beside it to drink deeply and wash the blood from her split lip. The stars emerged overhead, more numerous than she had ever seen them, and she lay on her back watching them wheel across the heavens while tears finally came. She cried for the father who had chosen his faith over his daughter, for the mother who had died believing Adelaide's left-handedness was divine punishment for some unnamed sin, for the loneliness that now stretched before her like the endless prairie. She was 18 years old and utterly alone in a world that had made it abundantly clear there was no place in it for someone like her. Sleep came fitfully, full of dreams where hands grabbed at her from the darkness, and voices chanted about devils and demons and damnation. She woke to pale dawn light and the sound of approaching hoofbeats, and her first instinct was to hide, to make herself invisible the way she had learned to do in Wilson whenever the preacher's wife came calling. But the prairie offered no hiding places, just grass and sky, and the unforgiving truth of her exposure. Adelaide stood on unsteady legs and faced the rider who crested the low hill, her hands balled into fists at her sides, her left hand throbbing with phantom guilt. The man who rode toward her sat tall in his saddle, silhouetted against the rising sun so that at first she could make out nothing of his features. As he drew closer, she saw he was perhaps 23 or 24, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that fell past his collar beneath a battered hat. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, and something about the easy way he sat, his horse suggested he had been born to the saddle. He reined in 10 feet from where she stood and studied her with eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. "You look like you have had a rough night," he said, and his voice carried a hint of something southern, some softness that took the edge off the hard consonants. "Are you injured? Lost?" Adelaide wanted to tell him to ride on and leave her be, wanted to protect herself from whatever fresh cruelty this encounter might bring, but her throat was too dry and her pride too battered. Instead, she just stood there, swaying slightly, until he swung down from his horse and approached her with his hands held out to show he meant no harm. Up close, she could see the kindness in his face, the way concern creased his brow, and something inside her cracked open, just a little. "My name is Quinn Emerson," he said gently. "I am driving cattle to Dodge City with my outfit, and we are camped about 2 miles south of here. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Adelaide heard herself say, and her voice came out rough as gravel. "Before church." Quinn nodded as though this explained everything, though of course it explained nothing at all. He walked back to his horse and retrieved a canteen and a bundle wrapped in cloth, which he brought to her with movements slow and deliberate, as though approaching a wild creature that might bolt at any moment. Adelaide took the canteen and drank carefully, the water cool and sweet, while he unwrapped dried beef and hard biscuits that looked like manna from heaven. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though every fiber of her being screamed to stuff the food into her mouth, to fill the hollow, aching void that had opened inside her. "What happened?" Quinn asked, settling himself on a rock a respectful distance away. "If you do not mind my asking." Adelaide finished chewing a mouthful of biscuit before answering. She had nothing left to lose, no reputation to protect, no future to safeguard. "I am left-handed," she said flatly. "My town decided that made me in league with the devil. They cast me out." She expected shock or disgust, or that particular tightening around the eyes that meant someone was judging her and finding her wanting. Instead, Quinn Emerson looked at her for a long moment and then said something that would change the entire trajectory of her life. "Your hands are God's creation, same as any other part of you. Anyone who told you different is a fool." The words hit Adelaide like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs and making her eyes sting with fresh tears. No one in her entire life had ever suggested that her left-handedness might be anything other than a curse or a failing or a sin that required correction. The simple, straightforward acceptance in Quinn's voice undid something fundamental in her chest, some knot of shame she had carried for so long she had forgotten it was there. She sat down hard on the ground, the half-eaten biscuit falling from her nerveless fingers, and began to sob in great gasping gulps that shook her whole body. Quinn did not try to touch her or comfort her with empty words. He simply sat on his rock and waited while she cried herself out, occasionally offering the canteen when her sobs subsided enough for her to drink. When she finally fell silent, wrung dry and exhausted, he spoke again in that same gentle drawl. "I cannot leave you out here alone. It is not safe, and it would not sit right with my conscience. My trail boss might have work for you if you are willing, or at the very least we can get you to the next town." "I have nowhere to go," Adelaide said, and the admission cost her but felt like relief all the same. "Wilson was my whole life." "Then Wilson was not much of a life," Quinn said, and there was steel beneath the softness now. "Come back to camp with me. Meet my boss, Ned Carter. He is a hard man but a fair one, and he has no time for superstitious nonsense. We need a camp cook since our last one got thrown from a horse and broke his collarbone in 3 places. Can you cook?" Adelaide thought of the endless meals she had prepared in her father's house, the bread she had kneaded, and the stews she had stirred, and the pies she had baked with hands that were never quite good enough, never quite right. "Yes," she said, "I can cook." Quinn stood and offered her his hand, the right one, and Adelaide took it with her left because it was closer, and because for the first time in her life she did not feel the need to hide. If he noticed or cared, he gave no sign. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength and led her to his horse, a patient chestnut gelding with intelligent eyes. Quinn mounted first and then reached down to pull Adelaide up behind him, settling her on the horse's rump as though she weighed nothing at all. She wrapped her arms around his waist because there was nothing else to hold on to, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, breathing in the scent of horse and leather and honest sweat. They rode south across the rolling prairie while the sun climbed higher and turned the world golden. Adelaide had never been this close to a man who was not her father, had certainly never had her arms around one, and she found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. Quinn sat easy in the saddle, one hand resting on the pommel, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or commenting on the weather. He did not press her for more of her story and did not offer platitudes about how everything would be fine. He simply rode and let her be, and that acceptance was worth more than all the prayers she had ever heard. The cattle camp resolved itself out of the distance gradually, a cluster of canvas tents and a chuck wagon and several hundred head of cattle spread across the grassland like rust-colored boulders. Cowboys moved among the herd on horseback, keeping the animals bunched and calm, their voices carrying across the morning air in calls and whistles Adelaide did not understand. Quinn guided his horse toward the chuck wagon, where an older man with the impressive mustache and a gimlet stare stood examining his injured arm in a sling. "Ned, I found someone who might solve our cook problem," Quinn called as they approached. He swung down from his horse and then helped Adelaide dismount, his hands steady at her waist. "This is Adelaide Brennan. She knows her way around a kitchen and needs work." Ned Carter looked Adelaide up and down with eyes that missed nothing, taking in her torn dress and split lip and the desperate edge that must have shown in her face. "You run away from something or someone?" he asked bluntly. "I was cast out," Adelaide said, lifting her chin. "My town decided I was not welcome anymore." "Why?" Ned's gaze remained sharp and assessing. Adelaide held up her left hand. "This?" Ned stared at her for a long moment and then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "That is the damnedest fool thing I ever heard. Can you cook for 20 men 3 times a day, keep supplies organized, and not complain about the work?" "Yes, sir." "Pay is $30 a month, plus meals and a place to sleep. You will bunk in the chuck wagon. Any man gives you trouble, you tell me, and I will handle it. We reach Dodge in 3 weeks, and you can decide then if you want to stay on for the return trip or find something else. Deal?" Adelaide felt dizzy with relief and the speed at which her circumstances had shifted. 12 hours ago, she had been sleeping by a creek bed with no prospects and no hope, and now she had employment and protection and something that looked almost like a future. "Deal," she managed. Ned nodded once, decisively. "Quinn, show her how things work around here. I expect supper at 6, Miss Brennan, and these boys eat like starving wolves, so cook accordingly." The next 3 weeks became a blur of hard work and simple rhythms that Adelaide found herself falling into with something like gratitude. She woke before dawn to stoke the fire and start coffee, huge pots of it that the cowboys consumed like water. She cooked enormous breakfasts of bacon and beans and biscuits, packed cold lunches of jerky and dried fruit, prepared dinners of whatever Ned had acquired in the last town or whatever game the men brought in. Her hands, both of them, stayed busy from sunup to well past sundown, and no one commented or cared which one she favored. The cowboys accepted her presence with the kind of easy pragmatism of men who cared more about being fed well than about the person doing the feeding. They called her Miss Adelaide and thanked her for her cooking and kept their distance in a way that felt respectful rather than hostile. But it was Quinn who taught her the rhythms of trail life, who showed her how to pack the chuck wagon efficiently and where to find water and how to read the weather in the clouds. He checked on her multiple times each day, always with some excuse about needing coffee or wanting to discuss the next day's route. But Adelaide began to suspect his concern went deeper than mere politeness. She found herself watching for him, listening for his voice among the others, feeling a small thrill when he rode into camp at the end of a long day. Quinn had a way of moving that was both confident and careful, as though he knew exactly what his body could do and was content with those limits. He treated his horse with the same gentle respect he showed Adelaide, and she noticed he was quick to help anyone who needed it, quick to laugh at jokes and slow to take offense. The other cowboys clearly respected him, and Ned relied on him to handle the more difficult cattle and the greener members of the crew. One evening, about a week into the drive, Quinn lingered after supper, while Adelaide cleaned the cooking pots by firelight. The other men had drifted to their bedrolls or to night watch, leaving the two of them in a bubble of relative privacy. Quinn settled himself on a barrel and watched her work, and Adelaide felt self-conscious under his gaze in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. "You are good at this," he said after a while. "Better than our last cook," and he had been doing it for 5 years. Adelaide scrubbed at a stubborn bit of burned bean. "I have had a lot of practice. My father expected his meals on time and properly prepared, or there was hell to pay." "He hit you," Quinn said, and it was not a question. Adelaide's hands stilled in the washwater. She had not spoken of such things aloud, had learned young that family business stayed private no matter what. But something about the gathering darkness and Quinn's steady presence loosened her tongue. "When I used my left hand, when I disappointed him, when he drank too much, and the anger in him needed somewhere to go." She resumed scrubbing, harder now. "He was not a bad man, just a frightened one. Fear is not an excuse for cruelty," Quinn said quietly. "And any man who raises his hand to a woman, to his own child, has failed at the most basic requirements of decency." Adelaide looked up at him, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, and turned her understanding of the world inside out. "Do you have family?" she asked. Quinn's expression shifted, something sad flickering across his features. "Had. Parents died of cholera when I was 14. No brothers or sisters. I have been on my own since then, mostly working cattle drives and ranch jobs. It is a lonely life sometimes, but it is honest work and nobody tells me what to think or who to be." "I am sorry," Adelaide said, and meant it. "That must have been very hard." "It was," Quinn acknowledged. "But it taught me that family is not always about blood. The men on these drives, they look out for each other. Ned gave me a chance when I was green as grass and taught me everything I know. That counts for something." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "What I am trying to say is that being cast out, as horrible as it is, might also be a kind of freedom. You get to decide now who you are and what you believe without anyone else's voice in your head." The idea was so radical, so completely foreign to everything Adelaide had been taught, that at first she could not process it. Freedom had never been part of her vocabulary, had never seemed like a possibility worth considering. She had simply endured, had simply survived, had simply hoped that one day the punishment would stop. But Quinn was suggesting something else entirely, that she could take this catastrophe and transform it into opportunity, that the ending of one life might be the beginning of another. "I do not know how to do that," she admitted. "I do not know how to be anything other than what I have always been." Quinn stood and moved closer, his boots scuffing in the dirt. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and in the firelight they glowed amber and warm. "You start by making small choices, like using whichever hand feels natural, like saying what you think instead of what you believe others want to hear, like deciding for yourself what is right and wrong instead of letting someone else's fear make that decision for you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he took her left hand in both of his and held it gently, as though it were something precious. Adelaide's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever touched that hand with anything approaching tenderness, had never held it as though it were worthy of care. "This hand is no different than your right one," Quinn said, his voice low and earnest. "It is made of bone and skin and muscle, and it does what you ask of it. The only thing that makes it sinister is the meaning scared people have assigned to it, and you do not have to carry their fear anymore." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes for what felt like the 100th time since leaving Wilson, but these were different. These were tears of something that might have been hope, might have been the first stirrings of belief that perhaps she was not irredeemably broken after all. She turned her hand in Quinn's grip and laced their fingers together, left to right, and felt the simple human warmth of him anchor her to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for bringing me here, for this." Quinn squeezed her hand gently. "You do not need to thank me for basic human decency, Adelaide. That should be the baseline, not the exception. They stood like that for a long moment, hands joined, the fire crackling between them and the vast prairie darkness pressing in from all sides. Then one of the cattle began to bellow in the distance, and Quinn sighed and released her, stepping back with obvious reluctance. I have the late watch tonight. But Adelaide, if you ever want to talk about anything, I am here. You are not alone anymore. He tipped his hat to her and walked off toward where his horse was picketed, leaving Adelaide standing by the fire, with her left hand tingling and her heart doing strange things in her chest. She finished cleaning up in a daze, her mind replaying every word of their conversation, every moment of contact. She was not naive enough to call it love, not yet, but she recognized it as the seed from which love might grow, given time and care and the right conditions. The days settled into patterns that Adelaide found increasingly comfortable. She cooked and cleaned and learned the rhythms of the trail, the way the cattle moved and the cowboys worked, and the land shifted as they traveled west. Quinn remained a constant presence, always nearby, always ready with a smile or a kind word or practical help when she needed it. They fell into the habit of talking after supper, long conversations that ranged from the mundane details of daily life to deeper questions about faith and purpose and what made a life worth living. Adelaide learned that Quinn had been born in Tennessee, that he loved horses more than anything, that he read whenever he could get his hands on books and had a particular fondness for adventure stories. He learned that she had always wanted to see the ocean, that she loved thunderstorms, that before her mother died, they used to sing together while doing chores. These exchanges felt like building something brick by brick, a structure of understanding and trust that neither of them had expected to find. But Adelaide was also aware of how the other cowboys watched them, the knowing looks and suppressed smiles when Quinn lingered by the chuck wagon or went out of his way to help her with some task. She worried that their friendship, or whatever it was becoming, might cause problems for him, might mark him as suspect by association. One afternoon when Quinn arrived to help her unload supplies, she voiced this concern. "People are talking," she said quietly, "about us. I do not want to cause trouble for you." Quinn hefted a sack of flour with easy strength. "Let them talk. I do not care what they think as long as I know I am doing right. But what if Ned decides I am a distraction? What if he sends me away?" Quinn set down the flour and turned to face her fully. "Ned is not going to send you away. Your cooking has improved morale by about 200%, and anyone with eyes can see you work harder than just about anyone on this drive. And as for us being a distraction, well," he paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Adelaide, I hope you know that my interest in you goes beyond simple friendship. I know it is too soon and probably inappropriate, given that we are working together, but I would be lying if I pretended I did not care for you." Adelaide's heart kicked against her ribs like a startled horse. She had suspected, had hoped, but hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I care for you too," she said, the words coming out barely above a whisper. "More than I probably should after such a short time." Quinn's face broke into a grin that transformed his whole appearance, making him look younger and lighter. "Then we are both fools together, and I cannot think of better company for foolishness." After that, the nature of their relationship shifted in subtle but significant ways. They still maintained propriety in front of the other men, but the awareness between them crackled like electricity before a storm. Quinn found excuses to touch her hand or shoulder, brief contacts that sent warmth flooding through Adelaide's body. She caught herself watching him work, admiring the play of muscles beneath his shirt, the sure way he handled the horses and cattle. At night, she lay in the chuck wagon thinking about him, wondering what it would be like to kiss him, to be held by him, to build a life with him. They were 2 days outside Dodge City when trouble found them in the form of 5 men on horseback who rode into camp just before supper with guns on their hips and hostile expressions on their faces. Ned went out to meet them while the cowboys subtly positioned themselves within reach of their weapons, and Adelaide watched from behind the chuck wagon with her heart in her throat. "We are looking for a woman," the lead rider said, and Adelaide recognized him with sinking dread as Samuel Morrison, one of the men from Wilson who had sat in church and watched her get struck without protest. "Adelaide Brennan. We heard she might be traveling with a cattle outfit headed to Dodge." "What business is that of yours?" Ned asked, his voice flat and unfriendly. "She is a runaway. Her father wants her back home where she belongs. She told me she was cast out," Ned said. "That does not sound like running away to me." Samuel's expression hardened. "Her father has had time to reconsider. He is willing to overlook her affliction if she returns and submits to proper guidance. We have come to bring her home." Adelaide felt sick. The thought of returning to Wilson, to her father's house, and the preacher's judgment, and a lifetime of being told she was wrong and sinful and less than human, was unbearable. But she also knew that legally she had no recourse. Women did not have many rights, and daughters even fewer. If Samuel and his men decided to take her by force, there was little anyone could do to stop them without risking violence. Quinn appeared at her elbow as though summoned by her distress. "Stay behind me," he murmured. "I will not let them take you." "You cannot fight 5 armed men," Adelaide whispered back. "Watch me!" Quinn strode forward to stand beside Ned, and several other cowboys drifted in to flank them, a show of unified strength. "The lady is part of our outfit," Quinn said clearly. "She is under our protection, and she does not want to go anywhere with you." Samuel's hand moved toward his gun. "This is not your concern, cowboy. The girl belongs to her father. Adelaide is 18 years old and free to make her own choices," Quinn shot back. "She does not belong to anyone." "She is cursed by the devil and in need of correction," Samuel insisted. "Look at her left hand if you do not believe me. No proper woman would bear such a mark." Quinn took a step forward, and Adelaide saw the dangerous edge that entered his posture. "Her hands are God's creation, same as yours and mine. The only curse here is the ignorance and cruelty of small-minded men who use faith as an excuse for brutality." The tension in the camp stretched taut as a wire, every man poised on the edge of violence. Adelaide could not let this happen, could not be responsible for bloodshed on her behalf. She stepped out from behind the chuck wagon despite Quinn's warning, her left hand clearly visible at her side. "I am not going back to Wilson," she said, and was pleased that her voice did not shake. "My father made his choice when he cast me out in front of the entire town. He does not get to unmake that choice now that he finds it inconvenient." Samuel's face flushed angry red. "You will do as you are told, girl. We will tie you to a horse if we must." "You will have to go through all of us first," Ned said quietly, and every cowboy in the camp nodded agreement. "And I promise you, that will not end well for you." The standoff lasted several long seconds while Adelaide held her breath and prayed no one would do anything stupid. Finally, Samuel seemed to recognize that he was outmanned and outmatched, at least in this moment. He spat on the ground and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over. Her father has rights, and the law will back him up." "Then let the law sort it out," Ned said. "But she stays with us until then." Samuel and his men rode off, but the threat of their presence lingered like smoke. Ned turned to Adelaide with a grim expression. "He is right about one thing. Your father could make legal trouble if he is determined. Once we reach Dodge, you should consider moving on. Maybe heading further west, where they cannot find you." The thought of leaving, of running again, filled Adelaide with weary resignation. But before she could respond, Quinn spoke up. "Or she could get married. A husband's legal claim supersedes a father's." Everyone turned to stare at him. Quinn's ears went red, but he held his ground, his gaze fixed on Adelaide. "I am asking if you are willing. I know it is fast and probably crazy, but I meant what I said before. I care for you, Adelaide. I want to build a life with you. And practically speaking, marriage would solve the legal problem. Adelaide's mind reeled. Marriage to Quinn. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and deeply appealing, offering both protection and the possibility of something more, something real and lasting. But she needed to know his motivations were more than just chivalry. Do you want to marry me because you care for me, or because you feel obligated to protect me? She asked. Quinn crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and took both her hands in his, right and left together. I want to marry you because I have been half in love with you since I found you by that creek, because you are strong and brave and kind, despite everything the world has done to you. Because talking to you is the best part of my day, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. The protection is just a fortunate side benefit. Adelaide felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once they were entirely happy tears. Then yes, I will marry you. Quinn whooped and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while the assembled cowboys cheered and whistled. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Adelaide kissed him back with all the hope and joy and desperate relief flooding through her, and for the first time since being cast out of Wilson, she felt like she might actually be home. They were married 2 days later by a justice of the peace in Dodge City, with Ned serving as witness and the entire cattle crew attending. Adelaide wore a simple dress purchased with her first month's wages, pale blue cotton that made her eyes look even brighter. Quinn wore his best shirt and had actually trimmed his hair, though it still fell shaggily over his collar. The ceremony was brief and efficient, but when Quinn slipped a plain gold band onto Adelaide's left ring finger, she felt the weight of it like an anchor, like a promise that she was valued exactly as she was. That night they took a room in the Grand Hotel, a luxury Adelaide had never experienced. Quinn was nervous and gentle, asking permission at every stage, making sure she was comfortable and willing. Adelaide had been given the vaguest understanding of marital relations by her mother years ago, enough to know the mechanics but nothing about the emotional component. What she discovered with Quinn was that physical intimacy, when combined with genuine care and mutual respect, could be its own form of communication. They learned each other slowly, awkwardly at first, and then with increasing confidence, and Adelaide fell asleep in his arms, feeling safe and cherished in ways she had not known were possible. The next morning, Quinn told her he had been thinking about their future. I have been working cattle drives for 9 years, he said, propped up on one elbow beside her. I have saved most of my wages, because I never had anything to spend them on. I have enough to buy land, maybe start a small ranch. Nothing fancy, but enough to build something of our own. Where? Adelaide asked, trailing her fingers along his arm. I was thinking Montana territory. Open land up there, good grass, fewer people asking questions about things that are none of their business. We could start fresh, build exactly the kind of life we want. Montana. The word sounded like freedom, like possibility. Yes, Adelaide said, let us go to Montana. They spent the rest of the summer working their way north, with Quinn hiring on for short-term ranch jobs to supplement their savings while Adelaide found work as a cook or seamstress in whatever town they landed in. They traveled through Kansas into Nebraska and then into Wyoming territory, following rumors of available land and opportunities. Everywhere they went, Adelaide used her left hand openly, and Quinn was always quick to defend her if anyone commented. Most people did not care, she discovered. Most people were too busy with their own struggles to worry about which hand a stranger favored. By autumn, they reached Montana territory, a land of mountains and valleys and skies so big they seemed to swallow the world. Quinn found a homestead claim near the town of Helena, 160 acres of grassland with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains that took Adelaide's breath away. They filed the paperwork and began the arduous process of building a life from nothing. The first winter was brutal, spent in a single-room cabin that Quinn built with logs he cut himself. They had 2 horses, 3 cows, a dozen chickens, and big dreams that sometimes seemed laughably out of reach. Adelaide cooked over an open fire and sewed clothes by candlelight, while Quinn worked from dawn to dusk, clearing land and building fences. They were exhausted and broke and happier than either of them had ever been. Spring brought renewal and a surprise. Adelaide realized she was pregnant in April when morning sickness sent her running from the cabin 3 days in a row. She told Quinn that evening while they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He gathered her into his arms and held her close, his face pressed into her hair, and she felt him tremble with emotion. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "I am going to have a family." "We are going to have a family," Adelaide corrected and kissed him until they both forgot about the sunset. Their son was born in January of 1884 during a blizzard that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Adelaide labored for 14 hours with only Quinn to help her, but when she finally held her baby boy against her chest, red-faced and squalling and absolutely perfect, every moment of pain evaporated. They named him James after Quinn's father, and he had his mother's bright eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, patient with the baby's crying and quick to help with feedings and changings. He built a cradle with his own hands and sang Tennessee lullabies in a surprisingly good voice. Adelaide watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love, marveling at how gentle such a strong man could be, how much capacity for tenderness existed in those work-roughened hands. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Quinn bought more cattle, hired a young man named Tom to help with the heavy work, expanded the cabin into a proper house with 3 bedrooms and a real kitchen. Adelaide started a garden and kept chickens and became known in Helena for her excellent pies, which she sold to the general store for extra income. They made friends with their neighbors, a family named Peterson who had a daughter around James's age, and began to feel part of a community. On James's 2nd birthday, Adelaide stood in her kitchen preparing a cake while her son played on the floor with wooden blocks Quinn had carved. She paused to watch him, this little person they had created, this miracle they had built together. James stacked his blocks with fierce concentration, and she noticed he favored his left hand. For just a moment, Adelaide felt a flutter of old fear, that ancient anxiety about what such a thing might mean. But then Quinn came in from outside, stomping snow from his boots, and scooped James up to toss him in the air. The boy shrieked with laughter, and Quinn caught him and blew a raspberry against his stomach before setting him down. "He is building quite the tower," Quinn observed, crouching beside his son. "Look at that. He is using his left hand just like his mama." The casual acceptance in his voice, the complete absence of concern or judgment, banished Adelaide's momentary fear. James was left-handed. It was simply a fact, no more meaningful than the color of his eyes or the shape of his nose. In this house, in this family, it would never be a curse or a mark of shame. It would simply be part of who he was. Just like his mama, Adelaide agreed, and felt the last chains of her old life finally fully break. By 1886, their ranch was thriving, with nearly 50 head of cattle and a reputation for quality stock. Quinn had become well respected in Helena, serving on the town council and helping newer homesteaders get established. Adelaide had started teaching a small school for the local children 2 days a week because she had discovered she loved helping young minds open to new possibilities. And she was pregnant again, due in late summer. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Adelaide was not also trying to survive a Montana winter in a one-room cabin. She felt strong and capable and deeply content. Quinn was attentive without being overbearing, and James was excited about becoming a big brother. Though at 4 years old, his understanding of the process was somewhat limited. Their daughter was born on a warm August evening with significantly less drama than her brother's arrival. Quinn fetched the midwife from town, and Adelaide labored for only 6 hours before delivering a tiny, perfect girl with wisps of dark hair and lungs that suggested she would have no trouble making her opinions known. They named her Clara, after Adelaide's mother, reclaiming that name and the love it represented from the painful memories that surrounded it. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and touch her tiny hands and sing to her the way his father sang to him. Adelaide watched her son, already so loving and gentle despite his young age, and felt profound gratitude that he would grow up in a house full of warmth and acceptance rather than fear and judgment. The years unspooled in a pattern of work and growth and deep satisfaction. James started school and proved to be a quick learner, especially with numbers. Clara grew into a spirited toddler who followed her brother everywhere and refused to be left out of anything. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to hire 2 full-time ranch hands and build a proper barn. Adelaide's relationship with Quinn deepened into something solid and enduring, built on shared values and mutual respect and genuine friendship in addition to love. They still talked for hours, still made each other laugh, still found comfort in each other's arms. Quinn never tried to change her or correct her or make her smaller than she was. He encouraged her teaching and her business ventures and her opinions, treating her as a full partner in every aspect of their life together. One evening in the spring of 1890, they sat on their porch watching James, now 8, teaching 6-year-old Clara how to rope a fence post. The children's laughter carried across the yard, bright and unself-conscious. Quinn reached over and took Adelaide's left hand, lacing their fingers together the way he had 1,000 times before. "Do you ever think about Wilson?" he asked. Adelaide considered the question. She rarely thought about her hometown anymore, and when she did, it was with a kind of distant curiosity, as though contemplating a place she had read about rather than lived in. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it feels like a different life, like it happened to a different person." "Do you think you would ever want to go back? Show them what you have built?" Adelaide shook her head firmly. "No, they do not deserve to see it, and I do not need their validation. The preacher and his wife and everyone who stood by and watched me suffer, they were wrong. That is all I need to know. Their opinions about me, or my hands, or my worth were never based in truth, or love, or even basic human decency. Why would I care what they think now?" Quinn squeezed her hand. "I am proud of you, for surviving that place, for building this life, for being exactly who you are without apology. I could not have done any of it without you," Adelaide said, turning to look at him. Quinn was 32 now, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun and a steadiness to him that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he stood for. He was the best man she had ever known, and she thanked God or fate or whatever had guided him to that creek bed 8 years ago. "You would have found a way," Quinn said. "You are stronger than you know, but I am grateful every day that I got to be part of your story." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, their children playing nearby, their ranch spreading out around them like a promise kept. Adelaide thought about the girl she had been, standing in that church with blood in her mouth and shame in her heart, and wished she could tell that girl what was coming, that the exile was not the end, but the beginning, that the hands she had been taught to hide would one day build something beautiful. That love and acceptance and home were possible, even for someone marked as other, as wrong, as cursed. In 1892, Adelaide received a letter forwarded through several hands, originating from Wilson. Her father had died, leaving her his house and what little money he had saved. The letter was from the town attorney, very formal and devoid of emotion. It made no mention of apology or regret or any acknowledgement of what had been done to her. Adelaide read it once and then burned it in the kitchen stove without a second thought. She had no use for a house in Wilson or blood money from a man who had chosen fear over love. Everything she needed was right here. She did use some of their savings to make a donation to an orphanage in Helena in her mother's name because Clara Brennan had tried, in her limited way, to show her daughter love, even while buying into the cruelty of their community's beliefs. It felt like closure, like the final severing of ties that had already long since frayed to nothing. The years continued their steady progression. James grew into a thoughtful young man who loved mathematics and wanted to become an engineer. Clara proved to be a talented artist with a quick wit and her father's easy charm. In 1895, Adelaide and Quinn welcomed another son, Thomas, who arrived during a thunderstorm in May. At 32, Adelaide felt she had finally found the rhythm of motherhood, the balance between work and family that had eluded her when she was younger and more uncertain. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the region, and Quinn had been approached multiple times about running for territorial legislature. He always declined, preferring to focus on his family and his land rather than politics. Adelaide taught 30 students now, had written a series of primers that were being used throughout Montana and served on the school board. By the turn of the century, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Adelaide stood at 41 years old and took stock of her life. She had a husband who loved and respected her, 3 healthy children who were growing into good people, a successful ranch, work that mattered, and a community that valued her contributions. She used her left hand freely and without thought, as naturally as breathing, and nobody cared or commented or saw it as anything other than a simple fact of how she moved through the world. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet, Adelaide would think about the alternate life she might have lived if Quinn had not ridden past that creek bed, if she had died of exposure or thirst or simple despair, if she had never learned that different did not mean wrong, that her hands were exactly as God intended them to be. The thought filled her with retroactive terror and profound gratitude in equal measure. In 1903, James married a lovely young woman named Elizabeth, who taught music in Helena. They had a big wedding with half the town attending, and Adelaide watched her son pledge his life to someone he loved with tears streaming down her face. Quinn handed her his handkerchief and pulled her close, understanding without words how much this moment meant, how it represented the continuation of everything they had built together. Clara was courted by several young men, but had not yet found anyone who interested her enough to settle down. She talked about going to San Francisco to study art, and Adelaide and Quinn encouraged her dreams, even though the thought of her daughter so far away made Adelaide's heart ache. Thomas was developing into a fine horseman and had announced his intention to expand the ranch's operations. In the summer of 1905, Adelaide and Quinn celebrated their 23rd wedding anniversary with a trip to Seattle, something they had talked about for years but never managed to accomplish. They stayed in a grand hotel and ate in fine restaurants and walked along the harbor watching ships come and go. Adelaide saw the ocean for the first time, that vast gray-blue expanse that seemed to hold all the world's mysteries, and Quinn stood beside her with his arm around her waist while she cried at the beauty of it. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "That I am happy," Adelaide said simply. "That despite everything, or maybe because of everything, I am profoundly, completely happy." Quinn turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. At 47, he had silver threading through his hair and deeper lines in his face, but his eyes were still that same warm, whiskey color, still looked at her with the same love and acceptance they had shown all those years ago. "You deserve every bit of that happiness, Adelaide. You deserve the whole wide world." "I have the whole wide world," she said, gesturing to encompass the ocean and the sky and the life they had built together. "Right here." They returned to Montana, refreshed and reconnected, falling back into the rhythms of ranch life with renewed energy. James and Elizabeth announced they were expecting their first child, making Adelaide and Quinn prospective grandparents. Clara decided to delay San Francisco for a year to help with the new baby. Thomas, at 10, was already talking about the improvements he wanted to make when the ranch was eventually his. Adelaide continued teaching, though she had begun training a replacement with the idea of retiring in a few years. She wanted time to write, to garden, to travel with Quinn, to be fully present for her grandchildren. She was 43 years old, and finally at peace with every aspect of her life. The baby, a girl named Lucy, was born in February 1906, and Adelaide fell completely in love with her first grandchild. Lucy had James's thoughtful expression and Elizabeth's musical laugh, and holding her, Adelaide felt the profound continuity of family, of love passed down through generations. She thought about how Lucy would grow up never knowing that being left-handed was anything other than a simple preference, never experiencing shame or punishment for something so fundamental to her identity. One afternoon, while Adelaide was watching Lucy sleep, Clara came to sit beside her. At 22, Clara was beautiful and confident and utterly herself in ways Adelaide still sometimes marveled at. "Mama," she said, "I have been thinking about what you went through when you were young, the way your town treated you." Adelaide tensed, uncertain where this was going. "What about it? It made you so strong," Clara said, "so capable and sure of yourself. I know it was horrible and wrong and should never have happened, but it also forged you into someone incredible, someone I admire more than anyone else in the world." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." "I mean it," Clara insisted. "You could have let it break you. Instead, you built this amazing life, this family, this whole world where people are valued for who they are. You taught us that difference is not deficiency, that there are many ways to be right. Those lessons, they are going to ripple out through all of us, through our children and their children. You changed the story, Mama." Adelaide pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, overcome with emotion. She thought about that 18-year-old girl, broken and alone, who had no idea that salvation would come in the form of a cowboy who saw her as fully human. She thought about every choice she and Quinn had made to build a different kind of family, a different kind of home. She thought about legacy, about what she would leave behind when she was gone. "We changed the story together," Adelaide said. "Your father and I, and you children. It was never just me. But it started with you," Clara said. "With your refusal to believe them when they said you were wrong. That took courage I cannot even imagine." After Clara left, Adelaide continued to hold Lucy, this tiny new person who represented hope and future and the continuation of everything Adelaide had fought to build. Quinn found her there an hour later, tears on her cheeks and a smile on her face. "What is going through that mind of yours?" he asked, settling onto the arm of the chair to run his fingers through her hair. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Adelaide said, "for you, for our children, for this life. I am thinking about how something that was meant to destroy me instead led me to everything worth having." Quinn leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You know what I think? I think you would have found your way no matter what. You have a strength in you that has nothing to do with me or anyone else. I just feel blessed that I got to walk beside you while you discovered it." "We have built something good, have we not?" Adelaide said, looking up at him. "We have built something extraordinary," Quinn corrected. "A family based on love and respect and acceptance. A home where everyone can be exactly who they are. That is more than good, Adelaide. That is a kind of miracle." The years continued to unfold in their predictable yet precious patterns. Lucy was followed by a brother, John, and then a sister, Margaret. Clara eventually did go to San Francisco and established herself as a successful painter. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Quinn moved toward retirement. Adelaide finally stopped teaching in 1910 at 48 and devoted herself to writing a memoir about homesteading in Montana. She never wrote about Wilson, never detailed the abuse and exile that had driven her west. That story felt too personal, too painful, and ultimately too small compared to everything that had come after. Instead, she wrote about building a life from nothing, about the strength required to homestead in Montana Territory, about the community of women who had supported each other through impossible circumstances. The book sold modestly but steadily, and Adelaide received letters from women across the West thanking her for telling their stories. In 1915, World War I was raging in Europe but had not yet touched America directly. James and Elizabeth had 4 children now. Clara had married a kind man named Patrick who ran an art gallery. Thomas was engaged to a rancher's daughter from the next county. Adelaide and Quinn were 60 and 55, respectively, and still deeply in love after 33 years of marriage. They took to spending evenings on the porch, wrapped in blankets when the weather turned cool, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and talking about everything and nothing. They reviewed their days and their lives, reminiscing about the early years and marveling at how much had changed. Quinn's hair was fully silver now, and Adelaide had more gray than brown, but they still held hands like newlyweds, still found comfort in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Adelaide asked one evening. "Marrying me so quickly, taking on my problems?" Quinn looked at her as though she had lost her mind. "Regret? Adelaide, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You are the great adventure of my life. Even though it meant standing up to those men from Wilson, even though it complicated everything, especially because of that," Quinn said firmly. "Standing up for what was right, for you, for us, that defined who I wanted to be. And every day since has only reinforced that I chose correctly." Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Quinn Emerson, more now than the day I married you, if such a thing is possible." "It is possible," Quinn said, kissing the top of her head, "because I feel exactly the same way." In 1918, the Spanish flu pandemic swept across America, killing millions. The Emerson Ranch did not escape unscathed, with several ranch hands falling ill, but through careful nursing and perhaps simple luck, all of Adelaide and Quinn's immediate family survived. The experience left Adelaide shaken, suddenly aware of how fragile life was, how quickly everything they had built could be taken away. She became even more intentional about time with her family, insisting on regular dinners where everyone gathered, on holidays celebrated with intention and joy, on telling the people she loved that she loved them as often as possible. Quinn supported this completely, sharing her awareness of mortality and the preciousness of every moment. By 1920, Adelaide was 58 years old, a grandmother 8 times over, and respected throughout Montana as a pioneer woman who had helped shape the territory into a state. She had lived to see women gain the right to vote, a triumph she celebrated with champagne and tears. She watched her children build successful, happy lives. She grew old alongside a man who had never once made her feel less than fully human. On a crisp October evening in 1920, Adelaide and Quinn celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, just the two of them. The ranch hands had taken the evening off, and the house was peaceful in a way it rarely was these days, with grandchildren constantly underfoot. They ate Adelaide's pot roast and Quinn's favorite apple pie, and talked about maybe taking another trip the following summer, perhaps to California to visit Clara. After dinner, they moved to the porch, and Quinn pulled Adelaide onto his lap, the way he had when they were young. She laughed and protested that they were too old for such foolishness, but settled against him anyway, fitting into the curves of his body as though designed for exactly that purpose. "Adelaide," Quinn said quietly, "I want you to know something. Every single day of the last 38 years has been a gift. You took a scared cowboy who thought he would spend his life alone and gave him family, purpose, and more love than he knew what to do with. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, know that my life has been exactly what I wanted it to be, because you were in it." Adelaide felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Why does this sound like goodbye?" "It is not," Quinn assured her. "It is just acknowledgement. We are getting older, and I do not want to leave things unsaid. You saved me, Adelaide, just as much as I saved you, maybe more." "We saved each other," Adelaide corrected. "That is how the best partnerships work." They sat together as full darkness fell, and the stars emerged in their millions, and Adelaide thought about the long journey from that church in Wilson to this porch in Montana. She thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become, about the hands that had once been called cursed and were now simply her own, about the family and home and life she had built from absolute nothing. Quinn's words echoed in her mind about making choices, about deciding for herself what was right and wrong. She had done that, had lived according to her own values, rather than the fear-based rules of others. And in doing so, she had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would continue long after she was gone. "Quinn," she said softly. "Yes, my love. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else saw only the thing they feared, for giving me the space to become who I was meant to be, for building this life with me." "Always," Quinn said and held her closer. "Always and forever." They remained on the porch until the cold drove them inside, and then they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room they had shared for more than 30 years. Quinn helped Adelaide with the buttons on her dress the way he always did, and she helped him with his boots. They climbed into bed and curled together under the quilts Adelaide had stitched by hand, one of which had been made by Clara and featured a pattern of hands reaching toward each other. In the darkness, Adelaide took Quinn's right hand with her left, their fingers interlacing in the way that had become as natural as breathing. "I would do it all again," she whispered. "Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of pain, just to end up right here with you." "Me too," Quinn whispered back. "Every single moment." They fell asleep like that, hands joined, hearts at peace, surrounded by the life they had built together. Outside the window, the Montana night stretched vast and beautiful, filled with stars and possibilities, a testament to the power of love to transform even the deepest wounds into sources of strength. Adelaide dreamed of mountains and children and a cowboy who had looked at her broken hands and seen only God's creation, and she smiled in her sleep, content beyond measure, finally and fully home.